Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Sarah Barnes-Humphrey, host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, and I'm thrilled to be moderating this important conversation about what it really takes to build resilient, future-ready supply chains. Now, we talk a lot about resilience in theory, but today we're breaking it down in practice. From the cost of fragmented planning to the promise of AI and digitalization, our panel will unpack how integrated thinking and smarter planning can transform operations, strengthen collaboration, and prepare us for what's next. So joining me today are two incredible experts who live and breathe this every single day. Dan Carrick, who brings a deep understanding of operational integration and manufacturing transformation, and Adrian Wood, whose expertise in AI and innovation helps companies turn disruption into opportunity. And today we're going to be exploring everything from whether there's ever truly a one-time fix for resilience to what the next generation of AI means for planners and business leaders alike. So get ready to take notes, ask questions in the Q&A box, and walk away with insights you can apply right now to your organization. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dan and Adrian to provide more of an introduction, and then I will be back for the panel discussion in just a few minutes. So over to you.
Hi, I'm Daniel Carrick, and I'm the supply chain manager for Hexcel, and I'll tell you a little bit more about Hexcel. So we are a global leader in advanced composites technology. Our primary target is to lightweight aircraft, right? Because one of the most significant expenses that airlines face these days is fuel costs. So lightweighting lets jets go further on less fuel, saving significant amounts of money. So our composite solutions make a wide array of products to help them lightweight in both space and defense, commercial aero, and many other applications, but primarily commercial aero and space and defense. So the product line we have is really unrivaled in the industry. We make everything ourselves, all the way from the PAN, which is the precursor for carbon fiber, to the carbon fiber itself and the resin systems. And beyond that, we also are the world leader in honeycomb manufacturing, and parts and details specifically for the end item customer, including helicopter blades and structures. So just to give you an idea of what our supply chain looks like, when we talk about being a vertically integrated supply chain, it looks a little less vertical and a little more like spaghetti. If you look, this is not intended to clarify the supply chain necessarily, but to really show you the complexities that we have to deal with. Many of our sites buy products from many of our other sites, and it's not one-to-one relationships. Materials are transiting all across the globe through multiple different layers within our supply chain.
Thanks, Dan, for that. Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Wood. I'm the Strategic Business Development Director for Dassault Systèmes. And if you've not heard of Dassault Systèmes, you'll have seen us in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. But if you'd like a little bit more detail, Dassault's company purpose is a little bit unique for me, actually. It's kind of nice. I've worked for a lot of different technology companies, and we actually believe that innovation should benefit everyone and everything. And so a statement about innovation should harmonize product, nature, and life is a little bit different. But we truly believe that innovation is not just about creating a better product. It's about doing better for the people that make that product and consume the product, and also for the resources and the planet that are used along the way. So we truly believe in harmonizing product, nature, and life. But innovation can be challenging, right? I mean, invention historically brings a lot of mistakes. Those mistakes could be costly. They could be time-consuming. Could also be dangerous in some situations. And so we believe very firmly that the best way to allow companies to innovate and experiment is using virtual worlds. So we've been a pioneer in building virtual universes for our customers for decades now. We believe that it's a key way for companies to innovate while still protecting, the resources that we have and bringing benefit to all parties that are involved. So the virtual twin is a key part of those virtual worlds, the supply chain virtual twin, obviously what we're talking about today. And what is that? Well, it's a precision model of your supply chain. No matter how complex, I love Dan's spaghetti slide, but that's typical, right? I mean, your supply chains look like that, and it's important to be able to represent that in the model that you build, all the channels, the customers, the different routings that you have, the manufacturing assembly centers that all are part of the ecosystem that's involved in getting your products to market. And that precision model then allows you to layer on top of it experiences like adding AI and optimization to help solve complex business problems. Of course, that model needs to be connected to the real world. I mean, data drives it. It's a living, breathing model connected with what's happening as you execute your plans and the ability to model any part of that. So it's all about developing a virtual world where you can experiment and plan in safety without the risk and rapidly, and to provide a continuous feedback loop. And the supply chain virtual twin is actually just one of several different virtual twins that exist. In fact, most people, when they think about a virtual twin or a digital twin, they think about the product, the wireframe of the aircraft or the cell phone or the car or whatever it is. And that is a viable, valuable virtual twin in itself. But it's just one of several different virtual twins. There's also the virtual twin of your production system. So the facilities, the manufacturing, resources, even the people that are involved in that. And each one of these adds value to companies in different ways. But where we think at Dassault Systems, true innovation comes from is being able to actually orchestrate planning and changes across all three of these virtual twins simultaneously. So as you design the product, how can you make the supply chain more effective in delivering it? Or as you design the product, can you actually manufacture it? Or if changes happen in the manufacturing virtual twin, how does that impact the supply chain virtual twin? So we believe that resiliency is a key part of bringing all these different aspects together to connect people and really orchestrate decisions across not just single silos, but all the organizations in your department. So thanks for the quick introduction there, Sarah.
All right. That was fascinating. I have to say, Dan, when you brought up the slide of your supply chain, we got a lot of surprised emojis, some heart emojis. So everybody loved that. And the fact that you called it spaghetti to really, put it into context, the complexities of your supply chain.
We talk about a vertical supply chain like it's just up and down, right? But it's really side to side, top to bottom. It's kind of all over the place. So.
Yeah, and it's okay to be a little bit messy with different layers, right? I think that's really why we have supply chains. It's complex. And then, Adrian, when you were talking about giving organizations, supply chain teams, and leaders an opportunity to showcase virtually and in a testing environment what innovation can actually do for their organizations, I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, it's too expensive to experiment in real life. I mean, you just don't have time or the ability to do it. You have to do it in some sort of virtual world to experiment first.
Yeah, I was talking about that on my live show this morning as well. And I was talking about it in context of in different industries like Taco Bell, they were practicing with voice AI and it didn't work out and then they have to scratch it. And so there's a lot of money in real world testing. And so I like the virtual testing environment. I think a lot of companies need that to see what works for them and what doesn't. All right, let's get into the panel questions because we've got a lot to talk about. And Dan, I want to start with you because we really want to talk about supply chain resilience. Do you think that there is a one-time fix for supply chain resilience? I mean, I hear this word all the time and I'm kind of like, what does it mean? How do we do it? Is there a fix for it?
Yeah. So, I mean, no, resilience is not a one-time fix, right? It is really a continuous journey that you've got to kind of commit to going down. And at Hexcel, we've learned that it comes from building adaptive systems and investing in the visibility, kind of like what Adrian was talking about, right? In that digital world, and then fostering cross-functional collaboration. It's really about evolving with disruptions and not just reacting to them.
Yeah. And from a technology point of view, that's important because adaptation is really key. So the analogy I like to use is that if I wanted to win a speed race or a drag race, I'd go buy a sports car, and that's the tool that fits the job. But if tomorrow I need to go off-roading, then I'm stuck. I need an SUV, right? So I think the disruption has hit us from so many different ways. You know, this year it's tariffs. Last year it was COVID. The year before it was Brexit. That if your technology doesn't adapt, you know, to sort of meet that, you can get stuck in a sort of, you know, sports car when you need some off-road capability.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think COVID is one of those primary examples of disruptions
Yeah,
that we didn't see coming, right? But that had global, very large repercussions across everything, right?
yeah,
So that's one that I think we've all had to kind of learn to adapt to, and that really kickstarted our drive to adapt.
yeah.
Yeah, and I want to get to that because I think even though we've kind of seen all the disruptions we think we've seen, right? There are still some that could come that we don't know what that looks like. And we need to be prepared and have an environment that we can test out different scenarios when that happens. If we don't have that, we're making decisions in a variety of different ways, but we're not being proactive. We're kind of being reactive, right? And I think that's where the trouble comes. So,
Most definitely.
yeah, and so Dan, I want to talk to you about operational business cost of fragmented planning. It's kind of what we're talking about today. I think that's the biggest part of resilience, right?
Mhm.
Why is integrated thinking so important? Like, what is the cost of fragmented planning? And then why does integrated thinking, why does that come into play and be such an important part of that?
So this is actually something really important at Hexcel with with the supply chain that I showed in that graphic that I showed. We tend to silo, not just at the site level, right? Which siloing is something that is commonplace, right? Even in industry, within departments within the same site. But when you start adding multiple sites to that, it just gets more and more complex and more siloed, and teams might be chasing different priorities, right? So one of the key things to getting away from fragmented planning is that you can align your priorities properly, right? And if you can align all your priorities and you can align your timing, then you can significantly reduce not only inventory, but your responses to market shifts as well, because a market shift may impact 6 different sites within Hexcel, and we've all got to be able to quickly align with the same type of tools, and that will help all of our agility across the entire global network.
Yeah, I always say collaboration is the future of business. And you're right. You know, we need to get out of that siloed mindset. We need to get aligned, but also aligned on that like mission. What's the messaging? Where do we want to get to? What does that look like? How fast do we want to react? Adrian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, Dan talks about different priorities. We've seen situations with companies where not only are they different priorities, in some cases they can be almost competing priorities. So,
Competing.
you know, even though everyone likes to think they're sort of, you know, rowing in the same direction, sometimes, you know, those isolated local decisions, people don't realize that the decision that's best for them might actually cause someone downstream in the process to have, you know, more complex, you know, problems or challenges. And so it sounds so simple, doesn't it? Just collaborate, get everyone on the same page and move in the same direction. But it's, it's the reason we're still
It,
here. We've been
it always
sold.
sounds so simple, doesn't it, Adrian?
Yeah.
Well, I use that phrase, collaboration is the future of business. And I'm always like, it's
Yeah.
simple. Just, use that as your mantra and we can all, work together and have, supply chain peace. Anyways. All right. So Adrian, I want to come over to you. What do you
Mm,
think the scope of integration should be across an organization? Like what
yeah.
are other key stakeholders that should be involved and why? We're talking about not being siloed. We're
Yeah.
talking about collaboration. We're talking across multiple different, you know, aspects of the business, but
Yeah.
also different locations. Talk to us about what that looks like.
Yeah, we believe the scope should be as not just as broad as possible, but as deep as possible. So I think, as Dan sort of implied, there's a horizontal and a sort of vertical dimension to try and get people together. There are so many different stakeholders involved in the process. Even if you just take sales and operations planning, even within supply chain, there's a lot of stakeholders. But as I said at the beginning, as you were pointing out, you do need to integrate with as many people horizontally as you can. So if you can integrate with design during the design phase, you can actually make the supply chain planning process a lot easier. But vertically as well. So strategic planning, S&OP planning, and I know Dan's planning goes out, multiple years, but what happens on a day-to-day basis makes an impact as well. So obviously the strategic plan impacts what happens at a detailed level. But what happens at a detailed level might impact, the master production schedule, the S&OP plan as well. And so we would always advocate, well, it's difficult, the scope of integration should be as broad as it can and as deep as it can, to try and encompass all those different aspects where it makes sense. The devil's in the details sometimes, right?
Yeah, well, and you're talking about design. And when you talk about design, excuse me, it could be the product, but it could also be packaging. And
Yeah.
packaging can make all the difference when you're moving products from,
Mhm.
different locations in different trucks and what that looks like.
Yeah.
Dan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I would just add that, I mean, it really does span wide, like Adrian said, right? I mean, all the way from your procurement, all the way to your production and distribution, and the stakeholders are really everywhere: engineering, finance, customer service. Um, those those planning decisions really impact everything, including cost structures, right? So everyone really needs to be aligned for true resilience.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see we've got a couple of questions already in the Q&A box. So if you've got any questions, make sure to put it in there. We're going to get to those a little bit later on in the show. So Dan, I want to bring it back to you because I want to zoom in on manufacturing. What do you think is the advantage for the supply chain in standardization and shop floor digitalization? I mean, this is getting a little bit niche, but I think it's very important because we're talking about each part of the organization having a role. What does that look like in manufacturing?
Yeah, so boy, standardization really is key because in the supply chain world, a big part of that is obviously our planning, right? We need to have something that is stable for us to plan, and we need to know what we're going to be able to get out of the processes that we're managing. So standardization will help with that, and then digitalization really enables the real-time visibility, right? And real-time visibility leads to better decisions almost every time. If you can identify issues that are going on the floor real time rather than having to look backwards, you can start using predictive analytics and being proactive and thinking forward instead of backward, which is really when you start to see the continuous improvement kind of improve.
So we use the word visibility a lot. We throw that around a lot in supply chain. When you're thinking about manufacturing and you talked about real-time visibility, what exactly does that mean?
So real-time visibility is, how many parts you're getting out on the shop floor. What are your machines running at? What's your real-time efficiency? What is the real-time utilization? And is that in line with what you expect and with what assumptions that you may have baked into your model? So you can very quickly determine if your plan is becoming obsolete, as sometimes things do, because in the world of manufacturing, stuff happens, right? And it happens all the time.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for answering that because a lot of times it comes down to also asking the right questions. So not only do we need to be aligned, but I think everybody needs to be thinking strategically and asking the right questions for us to really get on the same page as to what the words mean to each one of us. Because visibility could mean something to me, something else to Adrian, and something else to you. And I think it's important that we lay that groundwork as well for part of those discussions. Adrian, did you wanted to add to that?
One of the challenges is I can never get the VP of supply chain in the same room as the VP of manufacturing at the same time. So, and Sarah, last time you and I met was at the Gartner Supply Chain Symposium back in Orlando in May, full of supply chain people. And oftentimes when you ask the VP of supply chain, hey, what's the number one problem that you have? They'll say it's manufacturing. And so, but I can't, it's very difficult to get the same people in the same room. It's why we love working with Hexcel, because they've sort of made digital advancements in both the manufacturing side and the supply chain side simultaneously. So they're getting the benefit of that sort of, connection and sort of orchestration starting to across those different areas. But manufacturing can really help shape the supply chain plan in many cases. As Dan said, if you get that feedback into what's happening in manufacturing, you can make better, more confident decisions at the supply chain level if you have that level of detail available when you're making the supply chain plan.
Well, and can I ask you that question, Dan? Like, what has bringing manufacturing and supply chain together within your organization? What has that done for you?
Oh, so much. So it's really helped us to really understand the assumptions that we're using and to see them in real time, right? And those assumptions and that real-time feedback has really helped us to, especially when you're looking at your what-if scenarios and your longer-term planning, right? Taking all of the real-time feedback to tweak and adjust those models as you're moving forward brings a lot.
Well, and the reason why I wanted to ask is because, Adrian jokes about being able to get supply chain and manufacturing in the same room, but really it's a serious part of the conversation in the fact that, for those who are listening, those who are in the audience and watching this conversation, we joke about it, but really it's important. And I think it's important to not only competitive advantage, but really to your organization as a whole to make sure that you do make time to have the right people in the right rooms at the right tables.
Mm. And often it's not that companies don't want to do it. They don't want, the silos, but I think there is a significant amount of process and technology needs to go in place to help them make decisions in a more closed loop and seamless way. Otherwise, it just takes too long, to share the information and make a better decision.
Well, not only that, but in digitalization, I mean, you've got to have the data and the processes foundationally right in
Mm,
order for us to be able to take it to the next level and into
mm,
something like AI. And that's what I want to get into next, right? Because there's a lot of talk and hype around AI today. I just did a show about it.
yeah.
What actually really works in supply chain when it comes to AI? Adrian.
Yeah, I mean, AI, one of those really tiny, tiny words that covers an awful lot of ground. Like, so I like to categorize AI into sort of three big buckets. You've got the old timers, which is like heuristics, and this is the birth of AI back in the 60s. Still around, but the mainstay, people in AI is optimization and machine learning. And then you have the new kids on the block, the generative AI, agentic AI. I'm sure we'll get to a conversation about those because you can't do a webinar without talking about them. But to me, what really works in supply chain, and has done for many years, is optimization. Supply chain problems are a big sort of combinatorial numerical problem, a bit like a Rubik's cube. Lots of variables, a goal, some constraints, and this is classic. Sort of area where optimization truly excels at crunching massive amounts of data to come up with a scenario or a plan based upon all those constraints. And machine learning has sort of come into its own as well, because now we're generating all this data about our supply chain and our execution process and our performance. And we can now point machine learning at that data and say, well, what happened? Why did it happen? Because plans are, not really infallible. And so if we can look back and say, well, the last 9 times we did our S&OP plan, something changed. What was it? And machine learning is fantastic at sort of going back. So what works today is what's worked for a while, optimization and machine learning. The next generation AI, that's a different story, I think.
Well, and I think to that point, we all have to be on the same page about what it is as far as the data that's going in,
Mm,
right? Because it can't be garbage in, otherwise you're going to get garbage out, is what I've talked about on my show a
sure.
number of different times.
Yep.
But I want to go back to your 60s comment because I was actually watching a Knight Rider show a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about AI when they were talking to the car. It was the car
Mm,
named Kit. Kit
kits.
was Kit was like, I wish I had an AI system that could help me. And it was really funny. So when you talk about the 60s, a lot of people think AI is this new term and it's this new technology, but really it's been around since Knight Rider.
Mm.
Just saying.
I don't remember the 60s, Sarah. I'm not that old.
Dan, did you have anything to add around AI and what that looks like in supply chain?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful things you can use it for, at least some of the more generative and kind of, is deep diving back into the data, right? The history, and to understand where, actuals and plan maybe didn't align, and to start to understand why. But beyond that, also for future forecasting and understanding demand planning and things like that, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I go back to having the right people in the right seats in the right
Mm,
room.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, not only do you need to be aligned on the processes and what exactly you're doing, I think you also need to be aligned on the impacts that AI can make. What does success look like for you? What are the
Yep.
conversations that we want to have? What do we want to what do we want to see? What's the data that we want to input to be able to help us realize the solutions, and who's then going to take that solution and put it into practice? Is that supply chain? Is it manufacturing? Is it the different locations specifically? Right, Adrian?
yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of consideration that needs to go into looking at AI. Data you mentioned is a big part of that. The garbage in, garbage out. So I don't think it's a step that companies should take in a trivial way. I know Hexcel's looked at different ways of applying optimization to their problems. But I think it's really interesting. The promise of the next generation AI is very interesting to consider. I'm just not sure, how companies are sort of reacting to that yet, a little bit.
Well, and I was having a conversation a few months ago with a shipper, and they were saying that they have actually taken a step back and slowed down
Mm,
and really taken a look at their processes and everything holistically before they are looking into digitalization, or is it AI that's going to help them, or sort of what is that phase one? What is that phase two? What is the rollout?
yeah.
And I think part of that, and we were talking about this earlier, is what you do around the virtual world, right? Giving everybody the opportunity to maybe slow down in real life, but then, test things out and speed it up in a virtual world.
Yeah, I mean, if you can increase the speed at which you plan, then you can evaluate lots of different alternatives. And so the virtual world is sort of the perfect place to do that. Plans are only as good as the day they're sort of launched. My favorite anecdote, is not from an industry person. It's actually from Mike Tyson. If I'm showing my age, hopefully everyone knows Mike Tyson was a heavyweight
I
champion.
remember him. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. But my favorite anecdote from him is, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the mouth, and it's exactly the same for supply chain planners, right? The plan is as good as the day you publish it, and then, I mean, Dan, you have multi-year plans. How long do they sort of survive until you're like, got to change the plan?
Oh boy. Generally, a month would be a pretty good lifeline for one of those,
Yeah,
especially in today's world, right? There are a lot of changes going on, especially in the aerospace industry.
yeah,
So yeah, the shelf life on those has shrunk pretty drastically.
yeah.
And is everybody on board with that? Like senior leadership is on board with that? Because I almost feel like Adrian's Mike Tyson analogy needs to be said before every board meeting about supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah, they're generally, I mean, within Hexcel, yes, they're on board with that because they understand and they're seeing those changes in real time. So, fortunately, we have a very good culture and we understand the market pretty well.
Yeah, that's good to hear, right? Because it
Yeah,
has to start with those senior leadership conversations and have
absolutely.
that part of the organization support the supply chain teams in the fact that they're understanding that disruption is happening all the time and they're having to pivot and overhaul and knowing that a plan can only be as good as maybe a month, whereas before it might have been 6 months, 9 months, we could plan out 12 months. These days going down to a month, like that's a really big pivot for a lot of organizations and a lot of mindsets around supply chain or leaders of an organization.
Yeah. The disruption these days seems people often ask me, what's different about disruption today versus previously? And yeah, I don't think disruption causes the same sort of challenges of developing a new plan or trying to evaluate different criteria. I think what's different today is the rate of change of disruption. I
Yes.
mean, it just seems constant, right? And especially if you look at the economic trade policies here in the US that are changing almost on a daily basis, right? Sometimes, I mean, back to the trade show we were at back in May, we were talking to a lot of customers and said, well, we actually kept a lot of people back from the trade show, which was only a 3-day show, purely because they said we don't know what's going to come out in the news tomorrow about tariffs, and
Right.
therefore we just want to keep people back just in case we need to make another decision. So I think the planning speed has reached almost a fever pitch because people literally don't know what's going to happen on a day-to-day basis and how they'll need to react to that. And that's a fundamental of resiliency. And I know in the aerospace industry, it has a big sort of ripple effect around, companies like Hexcel who are planning to supply, in that industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll say tariffs was one that was also very complex, right? Because that reaches so deep into your supply
Yeah.
chain that sometimes you may not even be aware of some of those things that can impact you pretty drastically. So, but it
Yeah.
definitely leads to lots of multiple different planning scenarios and what ifs and how you're going to go tackle that and what's the best path, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I want to touch on that with you, Dan, because I want to talk about the ability to increase planning speed and accuracy. How does that really help with the disruption that we're talking about, that Adrian just sort of laid out, how disruption has changed, How does that ability to increase planning speed and accuracy help with that?
Yeah, so what it does, in my experience, is it really allows you to react to those disruptions before they escalate, right? Because if they start to escalate, they can get out of control pretty quickly. So, for example, when we see aerospace demand spikes or something like that, right, we are able to very quickly reallocate capacity and adjust the inventory buffers, which minimizes delays.
Yeah, absolutely. Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, replanning, as I said, the Mike Tyson analogy is key. Optimization is fantastic. It's sort of, just it's like the easy button, that people say. Machine learning is helping, though, I think. I mean, accuracy of planning is good, but even the most accurate plan can fall foul the day after. Machine learning and predictive analytics is really cool because, I mean, the best decision is one you don't have to make, right? I mean,
Yeah,
as
right?
you said, we think about it, but I tell you, disruption has caused such a challenge for companies, in the past 12 months that, the next one is right around the corner. And will it be the same or will it be different? Or how do we need to, adapt to it? So the flexibility is a key part of that resiliency.
Absolutely. Well, I've got a couple of questions left in this discussion. I want to encourage anyone who has not put a question in the Q&A box, and I have to tell you, it's a bit hot right now. We've got lots of questions in there. So put your question in there because we do want to get to that in just a few minutes once we have gone over some of the last questions. So Adrian, you mentioned the next generation
Mm.
of AI. We were talking about sort of the first generation, I guess, when we were talking about the 60s and Knight Rider and what that meant. But I want to get into the next generation of AI because, like you said, we can't have any webinars without talking about it. And I think the
Mhm.
next generation of AI that we're talking about right now is agents.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the next generation of AI and the future of supply chain planning? And I want to start with you, Adrian, and then I'll go to Dan.
Yeah, agentic AI and generative AI as well, large language models like we see with ChatGPT in our personal lives. And the hype for this is at an extreme. Personally, my jury's still out on agentic and generative AI. I've spoken to senior industry analysts as well, one on one, and I can tell you they're nervous about it as well. They don't believe it's quite ready for prime time. And if you look fortunately, in sort of personal and non-business, critical situations, you see it fail all the time. I mean, in Texas here in Austin, we have a huge amount of robo taxis. And suddenly, for some reason, they all drive to the center of Austin and sit there and flash their lights at each other. I mean, what could go wrong? For no reason at all. So I think I'm dreading the business story where we hear something go tremendously wrong with the next generation of AI. There's a tremendous reward though. That's why there's so much hype, is because those questions that companies want to ask, not simple tactical questions like what restocking level should this be, or what shift schedule should we run, but questions like if tariffs raise 20% on these products in these countries in the next week, what should our supply and sourcing strategy be? I mean, these are the questions that companies are asking, and now that agentic AI appears as this sort of beacon in the storm, saying, "Well, you can ask me that, and I'll give you an answer." But I don't know whether the reward potential is high, but the risk is also extreme. I mean, the bottom line is you have to remember these tools are basically probability engines. I mean, they're just looking for the next best thing to say in the sentence. And I don't know what sort of questions today companies would reasonably ask an agentic AI and trust the answer to. And the analysts say the same thing. Despite the marketing, I think it's a bit of a wild west out there. And I don't know. I mean, Dan, what sort of automation or questions would you be comfortable with with AI
Yeah.
answering
So
for
yeah,
you?
I'm with you there, Adrian. I think the risk is obviously high, but the reward is potentially high as well. So show of hands, who's ever done mundane tasks in their work, right?
Yeah.
I know I have.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it's only the three of us, so we'll all raise
yeah.
a hand for you, Dan.
So in those mundane tasks, that's where I really see some benefit for agentic AI, where maybe the risk is a little bit lower.
Mhm.
If we can take some of those, kind of routine decisions that we have to make, or routine tasks, and we can eliminate those by having agentic AI take care of those processes for us, then I think it can free up other people's time. It can free up planners' time. It can free up your procurement officer's time. And if we can free up that time, then I think we can start to shift towards more of the strategic instead of the firefighting and reactive.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. But I also wonder about the ownership around the data, because I feel like every time if they're not our own agents, we're giving away our data, which is really the next oil or sort of the power. And so when you talk about it being the wild, wild west, right? We have to start thinking about it in a little bit of a different way as far as the input that we're putting in is actually data, and it's owned by something. It's either owned by an organization, it's owned by a person. And so what does that mean? And I think you're right. I think there's a lot of testing that needs to be done to figure out what's right, what's wrong. But I think it's also not only trusting the data, it's also trusting in the solution that it's providing to you, because there's a lot of human bias that can go into that. And if you don't like the solution, or if it's going to make you feel bad, you might not present the solution to the senior leadership to say, hey, this is the way we need to go. Right. So I think there's a lot of different questions and a lot of things that we have to still answer for it to really make sense. But I think that trust word that you used, Adrian, is really important.
And there's a lot of IP in companies' process and products in every industry. Aerospace is a highly regulated industry, right? So, but even in consumer electronics, I mean, Apple has a tremendous challenge with their IP because they don't actually own their own manufacturing. So every industry has an IP issue. And you're right, agentic AI, generative AI, consumes vast amounts of data, structured, unstructured, inside the company, outside the company. And the concept of understanding where the data lives, and I mean, because a lot of generative AI is a black box. Even the companies that provide these models will tell you we don't really know how it comes up with the answer. I mean, again, what could go wrong?
Right? What could go wrong? And we're seeing it in every industry. So I really implore everybody to sort of take a look at different industries and how they're using it. So then we can talk about how it can be used here, but what's going right and what's going wrong. Like I was talking about healthcare this morning and an AI advocate, but that's, really personal information and data, and you're giving that up to something or somebody, or the AI company who's going to take that, and what happens with that data. Like that's really important information to that individual that individual owns or should own. And do you give that up? So lots of questions. And I think this is probably the topic for our next discussion, Adrian and Dan. But I want to stay on track and sort of ask this last question. One of the things that I've been talking a lot about is sustainability in supply chain. For some organizations, it is, a hot button topic as to whether it's a priority or whether it's taken a back seat because of what's going on with the disruptions, economic issues, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's important to talk about this in the context of resiliency, right? Because I think it can be a key driver to that. So Adrian, I just want to ask you and sort of finalize the discussion around sustainability. Do you think it's still a supply chain imperative, or do you think that it's taken a back seat to more of these pressing economic issues? And do you think it's more of a driver for resiliency? Like we have to keep it in mind.
In talking to companies about their priorities, each time we meet them, our customers and other companies at trade shows, unfortunately, it has taken a little bit of a backseat. 3 years ago, it was like the top of the list. Companies today literally just trying to survive, especially mid-sized companies as well that don't have the sort of the depth and the bench strength to weather the sort of economic changes that we've had. The types of decisions are similar. You're just swapping in and out different goals and constraints. Instead of a greenhouse gas emission as a constraint, now it's back to profit margin. So it's back to does the technology allow you to swap in and out different goals to meet the challenge of the day? But it's still a core philosophy for us. Back to my initial slide on the purpose. To harmonize product, nature, and life. And I think it also emphasizes the need to connect the different stakeholders because remember, there's a lot of the sustainability impact in a product is locked up in the design phase. And in many cases, if the design is a siloed process, when it's thrown over to supply chain can actually be kind of handcuffed in the additional sustainability impact that can be leveraged out of that process. And so this is why we think it's really key to connect that digital thread across those organizations. Because if you can design the product with sustainability in mind, in conjunction with the supply chain to say, well, if we design it this way, do we have suppliers to actually source the products in a sustainable way, or we found a new supplier in supply chain? How does that impact the design? You can actually have a tremendous impact in not just only being resilient, but embedding sustainability as a part of the overall process, not just a silo of it.
Yeah, and I think it would help with relationships in general, because I think about when it comes to sustainability, there's a lot of supplier fatigue out there. Because sometimes I feel like we keep moving the end result of what we're looking for because rules and regulations keep changing. And so if you can design it with that in mind, but also plan with it in mind, or do the scenarios within a virtual world without having to put it on the supplier first, I think is really going to help a lot of that. Dan, did you have anything to add on the sustainability side?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I mean, for Hexcel, right, I talked earlier about one of our key missions is lightweighting, right? And lightweighting really is a sustainability goal for the aircrafts, right, for the airlines. Decreasing the amount of fossil fuels that are used to travel, because travel has obviously grown exponentially since aircraft were invented and introduced into the market mainstream. So sustainability is something that's still very much a part of Hexcel and what we do. It is one of our core missions. But beyond just that, we're obviously looking at how we can become more sustainable, right, through recycling and through CO2 emission reductions, and really starting to measure and analyze all of that so we know how Hexcel can best contribute and reduce and take action.
Absolutely. All right, now it's time to get to audience questions. If you haven't put your question in the Q&A box, please go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to start with Bishau Juti. They have a question. What's your thought about geopolitics, sanctions, tariffs, climate change affecting supply chain? As you rightly mentioned, COVID-19 is a classic example, but nowadays it is difficult to understand the situation. Dan or Adrian? Who wants to take that one?
So I'll go ahead and start here. You think about geopolitics, right? And when you're a global company, that's something that we have to be considering all the time. So it's something that we're kind of constantly monitoring and watching as we advance through. But I think COVID-19 was one classic example where we saw complete disruptions. We saw with China shutting down and their ports didn't open for a substantially longer time, right? We saw it took 3 months in some cases to even book a container, which is something that is just kind of unheard of, right? But now we also have we have tariffs, we have all these different things, and really our scenario planning is what helps us mitigate that, and our speed of planning helps us mitigate those things.
The speed of planning. We had a question about that, and so I love that you put that in there. Adrian, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
COVID-19 was interesting. I just started with Dassault Systems at the time. Well, I've been in supply chain planning for a long time. I was sure this was the event that would finally spur companies to sort of, do a digital transformation to change. But it's funny, you still have such a lot of companies still running those supply chains using spreadsheets today. And I'm like, surely we've learned from the past. But I think the disruption is so different every day, and it seems to be so constant that it's still knocking companies for six every time. I just dread to think what's around the corner.
I know, right? There are things that we don't even know are coming. All right, I'm going to get to Chad's question. So with regards to planning and evaluating against what-if scenarios for future state production environments to be adaptive, has the forecasting timeline been shrinking with technology advancing so quickly? Do you see business case ROI being looked at as stepping stones versus what used to be long-term planning investments? Dan, I think you'd be good to answer this one.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, in regards to the what if scenarios, right? So we do a lot of that at Hexcel. We're constantly updating our long-term planning model and kind of extending that scope. And sometimes, you know, we tend to plan on our 2-year horizon, but we've actually started expanding that scope to 10 years in some cases, where we'll, you know, kind of build out a full production plan. But as far as the forecast timeline shrinking, not really, not in the aerospace industry. It's really, when you think about airplanes, right? You think about the shelf life of airplanes or the planning cycle for airplanes. You're talking decades long, right? So the forecasting timeline is pretty stable and consistent there, I would say.
Yeah. Well, so in my past life in logistics, I was moving parts for aircraft on ground. And so I know from like, you can't really plan for that. And that has to be, they need to have the parts like right away. So that
Uh-huh.
part of it can get a little bit chaotic.
Right, most definitely. And I mean, as far as ROI being looked at as a stepping stone, I think was the second part of that question. The other piece with Hexcel is, you know, in the fibers world especially, we are a very, very capital intensive business. It's very costly to get into that business and to implement and to expand your capacity, especially for carbon fiber manufacturing. So that's something that we look at very, very closely. And long-term planning investments are probably one of the most key things that we're trying to answer with those scenarios that we're modeling.
Interesting. Okay. Question from Yasser. Are you addressing current or instant visibility or also forward visibility to the future? I think that one's for Dan.
Yeah, so current and instant visibility is something that we're always looking at. We've actually kind of taken a two-prong approach there, where we're looking at near-term visibility as kind of phase one and long-term visibility as phase two. So in the instant visibility, you know, we have all the real-time feedback, and that kind of gets modeled in one scenario that maybe has a little bit different rules than some of the longer-term ones. But it's really both. We address all of it near-term, and then we actually parlay that into our long-term to look and expand that visibility out into the future, so we can make those key decisions for strategic investments and things.
Awesome.
And just can I add one thing on that, just about visibility? So when we think about a virtual twin, people envision a three-dimensional model. We actually consider it a four-dimensional model. I mean, you need to be able to sort of scrub forwards and backwards in time as well. You want to look forward to sort of what would that mean for the future in terms of long-term plan or manufacturing. And then, as we've spoken about in terms of AI, if you look back at the past, you can learn a lot from that data. But I do think visibility, current visibility, the snapshot of what's happening is key, but companies want to be able to scrub forward and say, okay, so what does that look like then in 10 years in Dan's case, which is a long time, but not atypical in the aerospace industry.
All right. And I think this question kind of has something to do with that. Ish says, can we get a visual explanation of the below from your agenda? Practical examples of AI, virtual twins, and real-time execution, improving responsiveness and operational consistency. Adrian, I think this one's for you. And I don't know if we have to take this offline, but over to you.
No, well, in fact, I think on the final wrap-up slide, we might have a link to something which might help from that. It's a white paper that we wrote on AI and supply chain. That might answer a lot of those different questions. I'm not quite sure what you're asking about when it says a visual explanation of the below, but there's plenty of material that we have which will help sort of bring some of this to life. Talk about the use cases where AI is really useful, where agentic AI could be used, but some of the risks, and data governance is something we didn't even talk about today, which is so critical for supply chain and AI planning. So happy to take additional questions or a follow-up from that person, or take a look at the material that we have as a takeaway for the audience. That might help as well.
Yeah, and even reach out, I think, to Adrian. And you're
Please.
on LinkedIn too, right?
Awesome.
Indeed, yeah. Okay, last question before we get to the final question that I have for both of you. Narisha says, what are some scenario planning tools that give the best results? Who wants to take that one? Dan?
I'll take that one. Yeah, I'll jump right in, because that's kind of the world that I live in the most. So some of the tools that we've implemented, I guess, first of all, what it really starts with is your own data, right? The data that you're feeding in, and you talked about this, Sarah, garbage in, garbage out. You really have to vet your data and understand what data you're putting into any planning tools that you're looking at. And there are a number of them. But where we've had the most success at Hexcel is actually when we implemented Quintic. Quintic was one that that we landed on, that we felt gave us the absolute best opportunity for success, and we've had a lot of success with that. I mentioned we talked about we've extended our horizons, right? This tool, we built it with the design in mind of looking 2 years out, and we've been able to kind of morph that and expand that all the way out to 10 years. And there's really nothing limiting us from going further other than our own data. So Quintic is one that gives a lot of really good options there, and we've found a lot of success with that.
Awesome. Adrian, do you want to jump in real quick?
I'd obviously second that, being the provider that provides dummy or Quintic to Hexcel. But I think horses for courses is another analogy that I use. You know, there's lots of different types of AI for different types of problems. Even within optimization, there's probably 4 or 5 or more different sort of subcategories of optimization, like linear programming and all sorts that can be applied. So it's important to find the right match to the optimization technique that solves the problem. That's something that we pride ourselves on, as our experience in how to apply AI, not just having a lot of AI. So I think that's key, in terms of knowing what's the right solution to that particular problem, and not mismatching AI. You can get a lot of wrong answers with the wrong AI. Back to COVID, just for one quick example, machine learning, fell flat on its face during COVID because there was no precedent for it. Right. So machine learning models that were in play during the COVID time became absolutely useless. So it's important to know how to apply the right AI to the right problem.
Well, such great questions. And now it's down to my final question for both of you. I love for the audience to walk away sort of thinking about something, taking action from this conversation. So what is the one thing you would like the audience to walk away thinking about or taking action on? Dan, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Adrian.
Yeah, so we've talked about quite a bit of stuff today, right? We've talked about standardization and visualization and speed of planning and all of those things. I guess what I would say is that the supply chain and managing supply chain is really a journey, right? It's really never over, and it's a journey of continuous improvement. So you have to identify the areas where you can make the impacts that you want to make, and then you need to just kind of start down that journey and take it piece by piece. And if you really want to see your supply chain take flight.
I love that. Take flight. Well done, Dan. All right, Adrian.
Well, I'm gonna build on Dan's journey analogy, and I'm going to ask the audience to think about how is your planning process going to tackle the next unknown disruption we've been talking about. I actually found, just for a show, does anyone remember triptychs?
Do you remember yes, I do. Mm-hmm.
So when I was traveling from Pittsburgh to Dallas when I moved here in 1994, you went to AAA and they printed off a whole set of maps of how to get there over 20 hours of journey, step by step. And I thought I was set when I had this, on my journey. And of course, how long did it last? 3 hours until you hit the roadworks, and then it's out the window. And we don't do that anymore, right? When we're planning road trips, we're using our smartphones and GPS because it's constantly replanning for us. It's constantly trying to find the best way to get us there. And I think, virtual twins and integrated planning brings that same capability to supply chains and the supply chain planning process. Everyone's always on the same page. Everyone's on course. We're all trying to get to the destination in the most optimal way. And I'd ask the audience, does your supply chain planning provide you that same ability to get you to your destination? And if not, what are you going to do to improve that process?
That's such a great question. And, I pride myself on having the skill to read a map book, but I know that today it's not practical. So what an incredible discussion. Thank you, Dan and Adrian, for sharing such practical, forward-thinking insights. If there's one key takeaway from me for today, it's that supply chain resilience isn't a single project, it's a mindset. Integrated planning, collaboration, and the right technology are what turn disruption really into an advantage. So for additional insights, make sure to click the QR code to download your copy of the white paper, AI in Supply Chain. And as we look ahead, think about what your operations could look like if every part of your business was connected, from planning to production, from data to decisions. That's where the future of supply chain really, truly begins. I appreciate all of you for joining us today. Keep the conversation going. Stay curious. And as always, let's keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in supply chain. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.